focusing on what matters to you and your neighbors. Welcome to Resistbot Live.
Hey everybody, we're back. Week 3 here on Resistbot Live. Glad to have everybody. Thousands of you have chosen to spend some part of your week with us each week for the last couple weeks, and it is really just a great treat to be able to say that to you. I'm Scott McTaggart. I'm your moderator here on Resistbot Live. Tons and tons to discuss today, just because rather than what we've done the last couple episodes, we're going to try to help out with what's been happening in the headlines. So there are a ton of different things going on with reconciliation, with the debt ceiling, some conversation about infrastructure that figures in here. We're looking at this really as like a massive interconnected negotiations kind of a concept. And I am honestly going to be like pulling research and things live. So you're going to see me looking away, grabbing at the screen if you're watching the live stream with us here at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. Remember, everyone is invited to join us for the live stream. That's on Facebook and Twitter, as well as YouTube and Twitch. You can join the live stream. That gives you the ability to participate in the comments section, ask your questions in real time. Exciting stuff. If you're going to do a million topics, or at least like a million subtopics like we're talking about doing here. So yeah, let's get this started. Again, tomorrow is Indigenous Peoples Day. Kind of an interesting thing if you're old enough to remember when such a thing was inconceivable, but now it seems like we're making actual progress on that and celebrating that, as opposed to Columbus Day. That will be tomorrow. Quick re-bump of what we started off with last week. Don't forget, the Reddit community is out there. Would love to have more people participating in there. Obviously, your comments on Facebook and Twitter and whatnot are always appreciated as well. If there's anything that you think would make a great topic or a great guest, be sure to let us know. Today is about what we refer to here internally as sort of struggling in public. We're working on something with you so that you can see sort of how complex this is, but also that you can get to a point where you can responsibly participate in the conversation, responsibly participate in the voting on various petitions and sending things to your elected officials. Before we get into that, I would like to introduce a contributor that's been with us, but this will be her debut today. Christine Liu. Christine, how are things?
Hi everyone.
So where are you right now?
So I'm based in Los Angeles. You're in downtown LA. Yep.
We got a West Coaster.
Yeah.
We needed the West Coast coverage.
California.
That's great to have you.
You.
And you've known about Resistbot. You've been participating on the bot. You go back with some of the folks, you know, in the leadership as well as on the volunteer side. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, you know, what's important to you and how you see the bot being used.
So first and foremost, what I love about it is being someone who is both an immigrant and as well as Asian American, part of a demographic that's the fastest growing voter demographic in the US. Often find that, you know, folks that look like me aren't well represented or are not dialed in or plugged in. So what I love about Resistbot is it just gives you a chance to stay and feel engaged, even if we're all busy, right? In our busy days. And even early on, as an early user, what I loved about it is when you are doom scrolling through Twitter, it provides you a nice outlet. It's just amazing to be able to feel like, you know, oftentimes we come across things that really can set us off for the rest of the day. And for those of us who feel like we are used to being in action on something, just the act of being able to make it easier to contact your elected reps has been amazing for my mental health personally, but also then you feel like you're you know, participating, which I think is really important.
I'm really happy that you're joining us. You have a tremendous resume and reputation in understanding international relations and international business. It's not just the immigration piece. You're actually a pragmatist in the realm of doing business across borders. Obviously, you said, like, you're an Asian American. You're familiar with those issues. You're connected to Taiwan. You're connected to China. It's going to be really valuable to the show going forward, and I'm really glad to have you. I'm going to lean on you quite a bit today, asking questions about sort of what's happening outside the U.S. bubble of these discussions about reconciliation and debt ceiling and whatnot, because I think there are times when we don't really understand how much of a noise we make on the international stage.
Absolutely, and that's the lens that I absolutely look forward to. Have no shortage of opinions on. So thank you, Scott.
Well, we will look forward to that. In the meantime, let's start bringing the rest of your new pals up on stage. Let's begin with Susan Stutz. Susan, I always look to you for research and understanding what's going on in the world. How are things?
Things are good. How are you? Hi, Christine. Nice to meet you.
We seem okay, I think.
We seem okay. There's chatter out there there's actually a lot of chatter about the debt ceiling issues and the infrastructures. And, one of the things that I did just to see what, people were thinking, I looked for some polling. And as a matter of fact, we have 538 put out an article just a few days ago about that. And so it seems to be about evenly weighted who people are going to blame for the debt ceiling issue. 2 out of 5 blame both sides. 1 out of 5 blames the GOP alone. So, but I'm not sure how realistic that actually is, because
does it seem as though that's polling just people who really know the ins and outs of it, or is this more just a general poll without screening the people? I mean, we should probably refer people. 538 does great work. We should refer people to 538.com so they can dig in on what you're talking about. But I'm curious what you read.
Interestingly, their article talks about that very issue, about whether or not people are actually educated on the topic. And it's really hard to gauge that, apparently. The article did mention that, not everybody was given all of the information. But it does seem like people understand what the issue with the debt ceiling is. They know what it means. And actually, one of the things that I love about the bot is when you write to your legislator, you can call them out on the lies that they tell. And the Resistbot community is definitely doing that. They're calling out the lies when they write to their legislators. But, the last time they really looked at people who understood it was back in 2013. And they haven't really, what they think now is pretty much in keeping with that. And some people understand it and some people don't. My concern, though, is whether or not this just these poll numbers boil down to Democrats versus Republicans.
That's my fear too. Yeah, that's definitely my fear too. Let's bring Melanie up on stage. Melanie, you're our duly elected representative on behalf of the audience. I don't think there was an election, but let's just play along, okay?
I voted myself in.
Very good, very good. First of all, good to see you. How are you?
I'm great. How's everybody doing?
I think we used the word doom scrolling earlier, but I still think we're okay.
I mean, I think that's appropriate when we all kind of exist in this realm of thinking we're in the apocalypse. So I get it.
That feels right. It's just like, well, we've got a phone. Is it really the apocalypse? I don't know. I'm caught somewhere between the 2 points. Tell me what your gut says right now, based on the audience reaction you've been seeing. Just like lately. Like, does this feel like there's the reconciliation and debt ceiling is dominant? It seems like the newspapers would have you believe that it's dominant, but I don't know that I believe that it's dominant with what I will call regular people.
I think people have segments of what they're interested in this bill. Like I've seen talk about, what they propose to spend toward HBCUs. The original proposed amount was, I think, 45 billion, and a more recent proposed amount was 2 billion. So there was a lot of chatter about that.
Melanie, I'm sorry. Can you tell me what the HBCUs, what does that stand for?
Historically Black colleges and universities.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk about that. And when you think about it, about who got this administration elected, the very, very heavy HBCU support. Kamala Harris is a graduate of Howard. So that's one facet of it. Then it seems like people don't completely know what's involved in it. They only know that they hate cinema and mansion, and by and large, I think that. And then there's the other aspect where people just don't care about either party. It's people are burnt out on the entire partisan topic, and they just really want to get things back on track, whether it's financially, personally.
Mm-hmm.
They just want the people that they elected to do what they say they're going to do.
I'm glad you brought up cinema and mansion, though. I really am glad you brought that up. That feels like it's overexposed. It feels like it's sort of like the scintillating argument that is maybe overexposed, and then the rest of it is still sort of uncovered, because people want to have the horse race and conflict. Sort of like they want it to be exciting in order to follow these stories. And I have to drop in the bit where if you've got comments and things, this is the part where I say, Melanie will be watching for your comments and questions and whatnot. It's interesting, though, how many people know the cinema and mansion piece versus maybe know the finance piece and the debt ceiling piece.
And I think part of it, I don't think that either one of them are exactly innocent or they're complicit in this. I mean, you've got to know that in times like this, if you haven't had a town hall in 3 years, people are going to talk about you. You've got to know that when you talk about entitlement and you're rich, people are going to talk about you. When you're actively, it almost seems like you're working against your party, people are going to have things to say, so, and especially when things are so contentious. So it's kind of, I definitely think it's overinflated, but I don't think they're helping their cause either one of them.
So you bring up something interesting about sort of like that immediately brings me to a question about what are the stakes of all this, right? Like maybe they would have a different opinion, or maybe they would be more movable. And I really do not want to fall down the cinema and mansion hole here.
Right.
There are a million different places that can talk about that, but I do want to talk about, and actually let's get Joe up here for this. Joe, Professor Buzzkill himself, Dr. Joe Kuhill. I got to make sure that you at least get a proper, hey, Joe, how you doing?
Fine. Yeah, I'm better now that I'm with everybody here.
Well, we're glad to have you. Melanie started bringing up this concept of sort of like, rich people talking about privilege, rich people not feeling as though that it's needed, but it's an entitlement. And I have a really big question for you, which is, as our resident historian, talk to me about stakes. If I'm just walking down the sidewalk past a newsstand, I will see reconciliation, infrastructure, debt ceiling dominating front page news, and all of the inside baseball negotiations supporting that. But I don't know that me or anyone else can say with authority, I know how high the stakes are. I know what's at risk. Let's start with just an easy one, like scale of 1 to 10. How big of a storm is this?
This is a big storm, and it's bigger than most people think because it's a cluster of storms. You have not only this sort of game of chicken, as was mentioned in the Senate the other day about the debt ceiling. That's only been postponed. And when all these things are coming in at once, I would give this a 7. And I think what people are spending perhaps too much time on worrying about is other things. I think all the panelists agree, I'd like more attention to be paid to these coming crises. If you've got the debt ceiling and the filibuster and the Manchin cinema problem, and also all the problems of democratic restrictions being placed in restrictions on democracy being placed in so many states in the last couple of years, I think we're headed for some pretty tense times by the time the new deficit ceiling, the new debt ceiling issue comes up in December. So I'd give this a pretty high ranking. I'm losing sleep, and I know a great number of American historians who are talking to each other and saying, "Well, wait a minute now, this is bad. Maybe it's not 1850s bad, but it's bad."
Susan, along those lines, then, what else do you think? What stories aren't getting oxygen because of how tirelessly these stories? I think of it simultaneously as one big story because it's all interconnected negotiation, right? But I also think of them as like separate, to use Joe's terminology, it's a cluster of storms, right? What else is not getting enough oxygen because of this? And I don't know if anyone has an opinion on this, but who's benefiting from the fact that other issues aren't really getting the spotlight?
Well, in one regard, I think who's benefiting are batterers, people who engage in violence against their loved ones. The Violence Against Women's Act has still not been reaffirmed. I know that's not the right word, but I'm drawing a blank on the correct word. That's still sitting out there. And, it was passed in the House in March. And it's only just now, within the last couple of days, getting attention in the Senate. And that is a vital program that provides funds and resources for people who are in a violent situation. And that should have been reaffirmed. It gets reaffirmed every 5 years. It's from 1994. It's long term, and it has been completely ignored. Along with that, and because of all these other problems that we're dealing with, we've got a pandemic inside of our pandemic, and that is the violence against women, violence happening in the home. And they call it the shadow pandemic. And I had never heard that phrase before, but I just learned that. And so, violence in the home has ramped up exponentially since the pandemic. And that is just, VAWA is there to provide funding and resources, and we just need to get that affirmed again. And so
that's a perfect example of what I'm asking, right? I
Yeah.
think if you would have asked everyone, they would have said voting rights. But the fact that we all would have said voting rights proves that at least it's getting some oxygen. I think the pandemic within the pandemic that you're referring to and I think it's violence in the home, and then the subsequent mental health problems and like additional problems that come from that.
Mhm.
I don't remember having heard anyone but you say that in the content, like in the last month or so, when everyone's been banging on the drum, cinema mansion, reconciliation, negotiation. So that's a perfect example of what I mean. There are things that are the regular business of the country, and I think it's incumbent on us to treat this, as Joe said, it's a 7, and let's not forget, right? Joe's not coming at this from a gut feel. Joe has studied our history extensively, but that doesn't mean that the other business of the country shouldn't be attended to. So, Melanie, what do we have? Is there anything coming in terms of comments from the audience?
Yes, we had Katie who kind of echoed the sentiment about the HBCU funding, the cut in the proposed funding, and how it's offensive given that VP. Well, I'll read it directly. The cut in HBCU funding is especially offensive given VP Harris is a Howard alumna. She ran on that issue, which is, that is where a lot of the support came from. To Susan's point, Paula pointed out how the dragging the feet on the Violence Against Women Act is just another prong in the war on women. there are so many issues that are centered in whether it's our reproductive rights, our physical well-being. Um, Recently, California just this week passed proposed, I think it passed a law that stealthing, which is, removing a condom during sexual intercourse is a crime, which is something that you would think should be a no-brainer, but these are just it's just there are so many little things, and it's, women are feeling the brunt of it.
So all of this to say that we're going to spend some time on the discussion that is dominating the news to make sure our listeners and those of us here on the live stream really feel as though we're at a place where we can responsibly interact with elected officials, et cetera. But please don't take your eye off the rest of these topics, right? I understand that they are big. Again, Joe, I know your standards. You are not a sensationalist. You're not a person that would say 7 just to sort of punch up the show and make it more exciting. It's one of the reasons why we're glad to have you around here, is the fact that you're not the sensationalist. So it is very important to be talking about reconciliation and exactly what programs are in there, and the debt ceiling and the credit of the United States around the world. But please, this is actually a great time to start talking about the petitions page inside the bot very quickly. If you're not already familiar, resist.bot/petitions, or just go to the website, find your way around, or whatever it is that you do to interact with Resistbot. Please make sure you're keeping your eyes open about what else is going on. There are USPS topics going on in there. There are reproductive freedom topics going on in there. Voting rights is definitely part of the conversation and should be. So we're going to do what we can to make sure that you understand the headlines and that you feel confident. But these other things that are going on and the oxygen's leaving the room for them, that does not mean that they don't deserve to be discussed. So, Joe, along those lines of sort of where your expertise is and whatnot, I'm wondering if you and I can't just talk for a moment about the history of these things. Like, let's start at the beginning with reconciliation and the debt ceiling. Assuming that someone is new to this discussion, give us a sense. What is the historical precedent for, say, reconciliation and the debt ceiling? What are these two parties discussing?
Well, let me first say that the debt is an extremely important part of American history, and it's an extremely important part of what makes an American nation, or any nation. The national debt is something that all the different states had to be tied to after the Revolutionary War. And for instance, dealing with the Confederate debt after the Civil War was a very serious issue. So it isn't just this abstract huge number that we always fear. But what's happened now is that we have at least one political party, and maybe a political party and a few of other people, who are intent on essentially shutting the government down. And this ranges all the way from Rand Paul to Mitch McConnell to maybe even Joe Manchin. The idea is that we want to stop the government from doing as many things as possible, and if we can throw up roadblocks along the way of reconciliation and then debt ceiling, and stop other important legislation from progressing, that's exactly what they want. So this is deliberate. The second thing is there's always been a very technical, especially since World War II, a very technical and what historians and political science call technocratic, meaning a fight among the experts, approach to reconciliation and the debt ceiling. This is usually something that's handled by grown-ups or people acting like grown-ups. And it is a reconciliation between House packages and Senate packages and things like that. And it's something that for most issues fades into the background pretty quickly. Once you're in reconciliation, the idea is that you're tinkering with details for the most part. Now, the debt ceiling, as everyone should know by now, it's been reported enough in the news, I think, is something that is another sort of automatic thing. You just can't default on the debt, and the debt ceiling can, in theory, be infinite, but it's one of these things that has this sundown clause, like very unfortunately the Voting Rights Act of it in 1967 and 1965 and other things, that parties, when they have to be, these things have to be reaffirmed, party can say, aha, here's a chance for us to jump on the bandwagon, make a big stink about something, and cause problems. And then the other party, perhaps the majority party, will have to give us concessions about other things. So it couldn't be any more serious, right? I mean, suppose being at war would be more serious. But the thing that makes the 2020s and 2021 particularly problematic is that reconciliation and the debt ceiling are things that used to be kind of boring and backroom and civil servicey, and they're not now. And that's why we have to have organizations like Resistbot pushing exactly the sorts of arguments that our other panelists are making.
So, quick question: is it better to say then? Okay, so the reconciliation thing, the debt ceiling, is it fair to say that it is artificially created urgency for the purposes of getting something done?
Yes, I mean almost all. I can't think of any legislation that ever doesn't need reconciliation. Right? The House passes a different version than the Senate passes, or the House passes something the Senate wants changes, and that has to be reconciled with the House. But usually those things are relatively minor. Mel is asking why, and Mel is asking, so someone has asked, why do certain pieces of legislation require renewal when others do not? If I can just give the 1965 Voting Rights Act as an example, that was such a strong act, and it placed on states what was called a pre-clearance requirement. The southern states especially they had such a history of voting discrimination that any changes in their voting law had to be approved by the Justice Department before their own state legislatures could pass them. And that was seen as such a very serious step forward that Johnson and the other people who try to get this through Congress agreed that there would be a time limit on it. So the assumption was, well, the discriminating states will have their act together by 1975, 1985. So we can put a renewal date on it if necessary. Hopefully we won't need it anymore by 1985. And that's how that happens. That's how that happens in so many of these other bills that we've been talking about.
So
I don't know if that directly answers your question, Scott. But
no, I think what we're hearing though is that we've got a situation where there are pieces of business that need to be handled that are kicked down the street,
right?
Irrespective of what else needs to be done. Mel, so this question about like why do some things need to be renewed and why some don't, right? Doesn't that seem like that's got a common sense answer to it? Like sort of just like there are people who are trying to make give themselves a second chance at the apple.
That's kind of how it strikes me. Listening to Joe, and there are high hopes that we'll be better by this time, but clearly we're not. So so we're in 2021, still dealing with voting rights, still dealing with suppression. So it just seems like there's a waiting period for complacency. Am I off?
I did the thing with mute. Sorry. You know how you hit mute sometimes and you start talking and then I literally
only
said
all the
this
time.
Yeah, we literally said this before the show. I said, man, I have to be careful whenever I press the mute button because I sometimes forget to click it back off. I struggle with this because I think there is a factual thing going on which is very serious and earnest. People say, when we create a new piece of legislation, we should give it some time. Because what if it's wrong? What if it can be improved? And I totally understand, like, let's take a look at this in a year. Let's take a look at this in 3 years, right? But I think we can agree there's also a problem with complexity of just everything. Every piece of legislation, everything that the government does has a downstream effect that creates additional complexity. And us sitting around talking about like, oh, well, let's do this tomorrow on every single topic just leads to this logjam where it feels like almost nothing is going on. Christine, I need to ask you this question. And I'm so glad to have this global viewpoint. Thank you so much. How much noise are we making on the global stage here? This feels like maybe people outside the US are looking at it, and it feels like it may also be something that they're not. But the debt ceiling especially relates to our credit. So I have to feel that there's at least some concern, maybe, in China where they hold a lot of our debt, in Japan where they hold a lot of our debt.
Right.
Can you tell me about that?
So the way I look at it from when I put on the geopolitics lens, they don't pay attention. People don't tend to pay attention overseas to the details of what we are stuck about, but they just know we're stuck. Does that make sense? Right. The optics.
Makes perfect sense, actually.
The
Because I think we
optics
feel that way
from
sometimes.
yes, the optics outside looking in when it comes to, and they'll look at it from how it affects them, in the world. So if you are worried about, authoritarian versus democracies, you're looking at a democracy that doesn't seem to be working sometimes, and no shortage of our competitors, or that's what we're calling China these days, officially strategic competition, right? No
Right.
shortage of opportunities for our competitors to then point at us and say, look at this thing called democracy, this American experiment, American experiment. See how it doesn't work. The US is still a young country, they call us, right? By comparison to,
Very much so.
other countries, we're still 200 something years old. And so for me, sitting here, right, in the US, you kind of get a little defensive sometimes when you're in these kind of foreign policy and, geopolitical conversations, because they're not paying attention to the details. They don't actually want to listen, which gets frustrating as to why we are stuck. And, they just know that we're stuck. So I just wanted to leave that there. It's just not great optics for us in anything else that we do or we want to get done.
Follow-up question real quick. So along those lines, does it feel as though you're seeing different behavior, maybe, especially from China? I think I'm asking about. And I'm sensitive to Taiwan right now. We've never really talked about this on the show before, but it feels as though maybe the behavior we're seeing from China is a little bit more than it would normally be because they think we may be distracted.
Absolutely. I mean, they sense that even during the Trump, especially during the Trump era, where they were paying attention, but the paying attention they were paying attention to was, what is this kind of unstable, unpredictable guy going to do next? And what is kind of like block tackling. Now that they have a Biden administration that is actually not letting up on China and continuing that, now you're seeing them move into a different mode where anything that's not working in the US or perceived to be not working is pointed to as a failure of democracy. And, whereas I would often argue the opposite with, folks in private settings and say, it's because we have freedom of speech. And it's because when things don't work, we can raise a lot of hell and make a lot of noise that makes our country very unique, right? So different perspectives. But yeah, so that's kind of the lens that I'm looking from these days.
All right, I have to make a quick aside to Mel here. Mel, I have to believe after that we stirred the pot a little bit with comments, because I think we may have caught some people off guard with like, this may actually affect military and overseas, impact. But I also need, and this is the aside part, like, it's super cool having an international viewpoint on the show. Christine, we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
It is quiet right now. We the last comments we've received are actually on still kind of the how we are slow in legislation, how we're backwards almost in terms of virtually regressing as opposed to making any significant progress on any fronts. So I can't imagine to Christine's point, I can't imagine other countries see it as anything other than we can't get our stuff together because citizens here pretty much see it that way as well from on the larger scale.
How much of this does everybody remember from school? Like, I'm talking grade school. And Joe, you have to sit this one out. Okay. Like, that's no fair. Okay. Like, how much do you remember from school? And then I remember I've got, like, a college professor over here. Like, you just need to sit quiet on this one. Okay. If you don't remember things from school, we have a problem. Susan, like, do you remember talking about the debt ceiling in grade school? I don't think I do. And I'm talking like all the way up to high school. I don't remember this.
Absolutely not. I have no recollection of that, Senator. None whatsoever.
I remember learning about it like from current events, but I don't remember it being like a part of civics.
No, I mean, I don't, I had a very good time when I was in high school. So I don't remember a lot of what was going on in the classroom, candidly. But no, these were not conversations that were taking place, not in my history classes. I went to a private school. It was a very small school. And apparently, we did things very different from everyone else.
I like Susan trying to, on the sneak, burnish her party girl credentials there right then. I appreciate that. It's just like very quietly on the sneak being like, and now I'm the cool mom who will buy you at the convenience store if you need the hookup. That's fantastic.
I was smoking and drinking in civics. What are you talking about?
Exactly. That's if I showed up.
She's like, you remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off? That was basically about me.
That was high school.
So there's a reason for that, though. There's a reason we don't remember it. And because I read something. So up until the Obama administration, the debt ceiling wasn't really this hyper politicized thing that we see now. It was pretty much established so that Congress wouldn't have to make a big thing every time we needed to pay bills. So, and if we needed more, they just pretty much unceremoniously. It didn't become this politicized bargaining chip, more or less until the Obama administration. Yeah. Surprise.
Go on. I mean, let's talk about that, right? Why? There's two aspects of it. Like, I'm not trying to take the easy shot about it being the black guy in the rock. I'm not trying to take that shot at all. What I mean is, because for the first time in some time, it was because remember, we had gone through a fiscally conservative run there, where even Clinton was pretty fiscally conservative, wouldn't you say, Joe? Like, I mean,
yes, extremely, yeah.
Obama was the first one, it seems. So before him, you've got George W. And I don't mean that there's a difference between, say, saying that you're a fiscal conservative and actually producing fiscally conservative results, right? I think if you look at the graphs about, like, does a tax cut spend money, right? That you can do that math on yourself. I'm not even going to try to tell you how that ends. Just understand I wouldn't be saying it if it didn't have a very clear-cut answer. George W., before him, Bill Clinton, before him, George W., before him, Reagan. It was the first time in a long time, I would say, that you really had what I would say more progressive ideals on the agenda. And yes, of course, there is also the bit where, having a black guy in the White House was probably problematic and traumatic based on some of the signs I saw carried at some of the rallies. So it became, Mel, to your point, more politicized. And it became about tax and spend. It became about you're trying to pay for every program. It's like, where do you draw the line kind of politics? And I think that I'm way outside my comfort zone here. I'm obviously not an expert, but I feel like we need to have a conversation about how appropriate is it to just assume that these things can't be done, that these, like, we're just going to always not be able to feed people. We're just going to always not be able to house people, right? Like, how appropriate is it? And how do we get to a point where we actually, as a nation, have sort of internalized that belief? Joe, I'm floundering out here. What do you think?
There's absolutely no reason we can't do those things except prejudice, and except selfishness, and except for the fact that, as you say, Scott, quite rightly, there are a number of people who think it's an unnatural thing to do, or it's tinkering with the free market system or anything like that. when the government wants to do something, and more importantly, we've been talking about democracy and people having a say. When the people want something to get done, then it can get done quite easily. The reason we don't have decent civil rights, or haven't progressed as far in civil rights as we should have by now, is because people have not wanted to happen. There's either not enough energy for it, or there's been way too much energy expressed against it, and on and on and on and on and on. There's no reason in the world that these things can't be accomplished. No, I should say no legitimate reason that any sane and moral person would agree with. It's simply because of prejudice, and because of a sort of knee-jerk reaction to the seeming knee-jerk reaction to any time the government wants to improve things. There's just some sort of American backlash.
It feels as though we don't deserve that in one part.
That's not the public opinion. When the historians of public opinion look at these questions, that's not what they're finding.
Okay.
What they're finding is essentially self-interest, group self-interest. So a group of people feel that by giving a right or a benefit or something to another group of people to try to level the playing field is taking away the same benefit from their own group, which of course is not. But that's very much, and of course politicians can jump on this rhetorically and boost their support base. This is exactly what we saw in the Trump issue. Just take the ridiculous things, the war on Christmas. This just absolutely completely made up stupid issue doesn't exist. But yet he was able to get people to actually believe that these things were happening. So in other words, one of the bleak aspects of recent years is that in a way, not counting the Electoral College here, that's sort of a special thing, but in a way, democracy is kind of working. An awful lot of what I think a lot of people on this panel and a lot of people in Resistbot would find disturbing and problematic about the trajectory of American culture are actually what people want. A lot of people in this country want, a good 40% or however many people voted for Trump in 2020 is just in 2020, not 2016, is a shock. And, so people are expressing their opinions and their values. And it's for like I hope I'm saying here, for sane and normal people, it's frightening.
But let me take that in a different direction. Susan, you and I had a conversation. I don't know if you were successful in finding anything about it, but the things in the Build Back Better plan, the reconciliation, the spending package, infrastructure package. Can you tell us about, those were popular concepts? Those were popular things, if I'm correct, right?
Absolutely. One of the things that, I came across was the Chamber of Commerce, and again, that it just goes to show you how you can have these entities in your neighborhood and not see them as this, national machinery. So, for instance, with the infrastructure bill, Chamber of Commerce was so on board with it, and they were trying to get, more and more support for it. And then the Republican faction, the GOP decides, we're not going to promote, we're not going to progress, we're not going to do anything that the Biden administration wants. And so when the GOP then started speaking out against it and saying, no, we're not going to vote for it, the debt ceiling, well, we're not going to, telling the lies that they tell, especially how the debt ceiling is to pay for future, that if they say no on the debt ceiling vote, then that curbs the Dem spending. But the Chamber of Commerce then did a 180 and is actively going out to people to get them to change their opinion on the infrastructure. The infrastructure bill will, that will benefit all of America.
And if the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a reputation for being more aligned with the Republican
absolutely
agenda because it's more aligned with the business. I mean, this is a very, very crude way of describing it, but
yes,
more aligned with the Republican agenda because the Republican agenda has a tendency to be more corporate in mindset.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it just, it goes to show you as if nothing over the last, and I think it really ramped up when Obama took office, if nothing over this time that has lapsed has told you how political every single thing is and how divided we are as a country. Just look at that. The Chamber of Commerce is actively trying to kill legislation that helps the whole country. And I
And they
just,
liked it. They liked it recently.
they liked it recently. They liked it really recently. And now they don't. And and it has nothing to do with that piece of legislation, and everything to do with the GOP and them wanting to maintain that connection to those individual legislators, as opposed to what's best for this country. And I think that speaks in a really big way to why legislation has to be reaffirmed every so often, and why we still have voting rights issues. And because the foundation of this country was built on enslaved people. And so race is built into everything. And what we're trying to do when we're trying to, make voting rights available to everybody, we're trying to undo these institutions. And that's hard work. And
Well, let me stop you right there, because I want to.
I'm
I want
sorry.
to ask. No. You're moving on, and I really wanted to get to the partisanship piece before it passed us by completely, because, Mel, Christine, you've heard what Joe and Susan have had to say, right? I would like you, maybe both of you, to think for a moment about, is there a part of this that just feels like the normal person on the street just doesn't want to get any of the partisanship splashed up on them, right? Like Susan, I mean no disrespect to your characterization there. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has absolutely 100% been aligned with Republican, corporate interests. We know this. It's a non-controversial opinion. But if I were new to the discussion, Mel, Christine, what do you think? Is this already maybe too partisan for maybe the frayed psyches of people that have been trapped inside their houses for 2 years?
I think it's twofold. I think people do not really care. They just want something done. They don't care. There's a part where people just don't care, Democrat or Republican, get it done. But then there's like these polls where the bill is overwhelmingly supported by the country, but in the same poll, it's that tongue twister university, Quinnipiac. I'm going to screw that up.
Yes, you got it. That was really good.
Oh, did I?
I just happen to have a friend that teaches there. Is the only reason I know that.
Okay, phonics champion. So, but the poll said that even though the bill has majority support, the polled people still, the majority want the Republicans to take the House back. So people are burnt out, and there's no actual rhyme or reason on its face other than folks like the status quo. I mean, the world we're living in, marginalized people have more of a voice, marginalized people have more of a say, and we're loud and we're annoying, and they don't want to hear it, and people just want quiet. They want change, but they want quiet change, and they want the change that's not going to shake up their lives too much. So, and the GOP still kind of represents that status quo. So I think that has something to do with it, where yes, people are burnt out on partisanship. I don't think people care about voting, especially since Biden's been in office for 10 months, 9 months, and everything has not changed by now. So that means it's a wash, and we need to go back. And it's people are just frustrated and burnt out across the board, is what I take away from it.
What do you think, Christine?
I agree. I think, honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I'm assuming most people are just wondering when is my work schedule going to line up with my kids' schedule? And because COVID and people like I'm the mom of a 16-year-old, I'm dealing with this, every week you're kind of hoping that, some portion of the school doesn't get sent home because, so like these are the things that are on your mind. And, a lot of us, I think, did a lot of soul searching on a personal level during this last year and a half and just reflected on just what we're doing with our own lives. So I feel like there's this inwardness. It's almost like those of us who do care and pay attention, it's almost like for a subset of the population, oh, what a relief. I did my part. Biden got elected, right?
Mhm.
And then now they're dealing with their own stuff.
I
So,
felt
so
that.
I agree.
When you just
Yeah.
said that, I felt that. That feels
Yeah.
absolutely so. So Melanie's comment about, well, it should be quiet change lines up nicely with, well, I did my part. The president got elected the way I wanted, and now I've got 4 years off.
Mhm.
Okay. So um, I appreciate everyone being willing to just sort of talk through what things we found on our own. Let's do a quick wrap up for the week. I would encourage everyone get onto the bot, make sure you're signing the petitions and sending your own correspondence to your elected officials. Make sure you're involved here. We'll do our part to make sure you feel as though you can do so responsibly, but definitely you also want to be thinking about, where can I find better information? How can I find the things that can help me with this? Christine, let's start with you since it's your very first show. Where are you going to be? What are you working on? What would you like people to look at?
What I'm kind of excited about is, at least within the Asian American community, like what I said before about the complacency, I'm in this mode with a few others of, well, what next? Because the midterm elections for us, since this rise of anti-Asian sentiment, has been a wake-up call. And this is going to be our first election, if you will, mobilized after, feeling this trauma, the past year and a half of being targeted. And what can we do about it? And historically, we have not been a very vocal group collectively as voters. And so I'm just looking forward to things like Karen Bass, who has announced that she's running for mayor here in Los Angeles, and her current congresswoman. How do we mobilize communities to support the candidates that we want to see, in next year? So that's kind of, you're starting to hear all that midterm stuff, and I want people to pay attention. Yeah.
Well, Christine, your first episode was a big success. We were glad to have
Great.
you. We'll ask everybody to tune in. I think you're with us next week too when we kick off immigration and asylum. So we'll hear more from you then.
Thanks.
Joe Kuhill, where are you going to be? What do you want people to do? What are you up to?
Well, let me first say, folks, that I'm glad you, at the very beginning of the show, we talked about Indigenous Peoples Day, because I'm very pleased that, at least in my lifetime, that will become the holiday, and that has changed so much in the last 15 years. And it's something that is needed to be done a long time ago. And I can talk about the weird sort of or origin of Columbus Day till the cows come home. But as always, I'm glad that a lot of these things are making progress. As far as what I'm doing, I'm continuing with the show, ProfessorBuzzkill.com, and I'm doom scrolling just like everyone else.
Stop it.
My hope is that I can eventually start, I don't know, smile scrolling or whatever it is. But please go to
That's not a thing.
ProfessorBuzzkill.com.
But if you invent it, I'll be very happy.
There should be a good word for it. The first time I heard doom scrolling, I almost fell off my chair laughing, because it's exactly the perfect description of what was going on.
All right, now stop it. Joe, thanks for all your contributions this week. Mel, what are you up to?
Still supporting my friends at hashtag Tailgate Together. Also, on my lighter side, I am podcasting at the Bad Advice Show. You can follow us there, where where I jump out as a moderately terrible but very funny person. And you can follow me on Twitter, The Gates of Mel. The O is a 0, so That's where I'll be talking about this and whatever random pop cultural take I have at the time.
I feel like there should be, some kind of warning there. Sometimes I feel like sometimes people make you very angry. but we'll let them figure it out for themselves. We should
I'm
let them figure it
spicy,
out
but I'm nice. I'm spicy but sweet. I'm like, I don't know, a sauce. I don't know.
We are very glad to have you for certain. Mel, thanks for all your contributions this week.
Thanks, guys.
Susan, you get to close us out because of bringing me almost to tears with your endorsement the one time of To Write Love on Her Arms. And I just feel like you have a great tendency to bring the house down on plugs and things that people should be supporting. What are you doing this week? What do you want people looking at?
You may recall I mentioned last week that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Ladies out there, there is no age too young for you to start doing exams on your own, even if you're not old enough to go to the doctor to get a clinical yet. But October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so I just encourage people to reach out to their legislators and in the Senate and encourage them to reaffirm the Violence Against Women Act. 1 in 3 women around the globe is going to be a victim of domestic violence. And that is a horrific number. That's 2.9 billion women, billion with a B. And it doesn't need to be like that. So I just encourage people to check themselves and reach out to their legislatures. And we've got to stop the war on women.
Susan, you do a great job serving as my substitute conscience. I really feel guilty when compared to you, which I think I'm going to thank you for, but also I'm going to spend the next couple minutes feeling bad because I don't feel as substantial as you. Thank you for everything, as always.
My pleasure.
And that leaves me just some quick business to sort out before the end. Remember, this show appears on Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and YouTube, and that's the live stream that happens at 1 o'clock Eastern time every Sunday. Video replays are available in those locations. We would love to have you here with us live because then you can shoot things into the comments, and Melanie will be forced to deal with them, which, let's be honest, when she does it, it's a lot more fun. On top of that, I would just like to say this whole thing is volunteers and donations driven. If you would like to join us, if you would like to be a volunteer, if you would like to donate to Resistbot and help your neighbors find out what is going on in the world, we would really appreciate that as well. You can always find more at resist.bot. I think that's basically it. Thanks for all the great support. Like I said, thousands of you have been watching and listening over the first 2 shows. And we weren't sure that we were going to get to this level of success this quickly. It's a testament to how many people love Resistbot and how many of you really want to be civically engaged. Please stick with us. Let us know what else it is that we can do for you, what it is that you want to hear about. The next topic we're going to tackle is immigration and asylum. Next week's going to be Asylum 101. I think it's going to be really important for any conversation about immigration and asylum. And obviously, there's a race component here that figures in as so many of these different topics have. And when we're talking about people coming to the U.S., we have to be talking about how many of them are just running from a situation that they don't have another move. And we've got to be, as citizens, really sharp about what does that mean? What can we do about it? And honestly, I would say we have to be careful about how we discuss it amongst ourselves, or else it does sort of become part of the psyche, and the details are important. So until next week, we appreciate you. We'll catch you then. Resistbot and Resistbot Live are nonprofit efforts made possible by our volunteers and charitable donors. Join us by visiting resist.bot and follow us on every major social platform using the name Resistbot. Contributors appearing on Resistbot Live include Susan Stutz, Athena Foulé, Melanie Dion, Dr. Joseph Kuhil, Christine Liu, and me, Scott McTaggart. Every installment of Resistbot Live begins as a live stream at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. If you miss the live stream, Video replays are available at those same destinations. Audio replays are available wherever you get your podcasts. The music at the beginning and end of the show is provided by the artist Punch Deck. The opening track is called The Sound Consumed. This track is called Persistence. Both tracks are available for purchase and download at punchdeck.bandcamp.com.